Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Fall 2024 Student Debate. I'm Haley, this is Leah, and we are the co-executive directors of the Political Student Assembly. We, alongside Duncan, president of the USC Political Union, are honored to be moderating tonight's discussion. Tonight, we gather to engage in a meaningful dialogue on some of the most pressing issues facing our nation today. Our aim is to foster an environment where diverse perspectives are not only shared, but respected and thoughtfully considered. With what is expected to be one of the closest presidential elections in American history, less than 2 weeks away, tensions are high and polarization is strong. In times like these, we believe events like this are crucial for promoting understanding and collaboration within our campus community. We believe that through open and respectful conversation, we can bridge these divides and work towards solutions that benefit us all. That being said, please remember that the USC Political Student Assembly and the USC Political Union maintain a neutral stance regarding the views expressed here tonight. Our role is to facilitate a fair and balanced discussion, ensuring that every voice is heard and that discriminatory remarks of any kind are not tolerated. Thank you all for being here and for your commitment to constructive dialogue. Let's approach tonight's debate with a spirit of mutual respect and a shared dedication to making a positive impact on our campus and beyond. With that, Duncan will explain the ground rules for tonight's debate.
Thank you, Haley. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Tonight's debate will cover 4 topics. For the first 3 topics, the structure will be as follows. We'll have 3 minutes for each debater's opening statement, 2 minutes for a rebuttal from each debater, 4 minutes for cross-debate, where debaters can engage directly with each other, and 2 minutes for each debater's closing statement. The format for the final topic will be explained later. We ask that all debaters strictly adhere to the time limits for each segment. To ensure fairness, the moderators will enforce these limits throughout the debate. You'll hear a gavel once when you have 10 seconds remaining, and we will gavel repeatedly when your time is up. A few important ground rules. No crosstalk. Please wait your turn to speak and respect one another's time. Interruptions or attempts to speak over others will result in a time penalty, with the time deducted from your own speaking opportunity. The moderators have full discretion to manage the debate and enforce these rules as necessary, including time limits. To our audience, we expect the same level of respect from you as we do from our debaters. While expressions of support such as snapping or clicking are allowed, please refrain from loud applause or cheering until the end of each round to maintain a respectful and focused environment. Thank you and good luck to our debaters.
For our first topic on the economy, please welcome on your right, Juan Pablo Moreland, who will be debating for the Republicans, and on your left, River Mensch, who will be debating for the Democrats. The rising cost of living, particularly in relation to food and other basic necessities, is a significant challenge for many Americans today. As inflation continues to impact everyday expenses, questions arise about the government's role in addressing these economic pressures. One particularly controversial issue in this area is the question of whether the federal government should implement a national right-to-work law. A right-to-work law means that workers cannot be required to join a union or pay union dues as a condition of employment. Proponents of this policy argue that it promotes individual freedom, gives workers the choice whether or not to participate in a union, while also making states more attractive to businesses by lowering labor costs and increasing flexibility. On the other hand, opponents claim that such laws weaken unions, leading to lower wages, fewer benefits, and diminished workplace protections for workers. In light of these arguments, our question is, should the federal government implement a national right-to-work law? We'll begin with the Republicans.
Good evening. Thank you to the Political Student Assembly, the GOP and Democrat clubs, and all in attendance for making the event happen. My name is Juan Pablo. Forcing people to associate with any given group is not the American way. But that's exactly what businesses do through union security agreements, which allow unions to compel individual workers to effectively pay dues, whether they're members or not. It's the state's responsibility to protect its citizens from being forced to join a union just so they can have a job. 80% of Americans believe union dues should not be compulsory. 28 states have that protection. The rest should too. California is a forced unionism state. Just to join the Screen Actors Guild, as many of our peers will, you had to pay $3,000, about the same as a down payment on a car. Take recent news too. The longshoremen's union enrollment fee is $1,500 and generally deducts 1 to 2% of a worker's hard-earned income in dues. When longshoremen average around $50,000 in annual salary, the pinch is real. That's multiple weeks of groceries for parents and their family. That's money for gas to drive to work. That's money that could go towards a well-needed vacation. But where does it go? The union. And then where does it go from there? Harold Daggett, the lead negotiator for the Longshoremen's Union, pulls in close to $1 million in yearly compensation. He owns a 76-foot yacht and a Bentley. On top of that, the union bosses wrote off $145,000 each year for Yankees baseball tickets and another $20,000 in dues for the exclusive New York Athletic Club. The free riders here are the union bosses. Labor unions do not have to represent non-members. They have chosen to do so and then complain about it. The bosses know they'll always be able to buy the loyalty to the Democratic Party, though that's why blue states look the other way when union bosses pull in exorbitant salaries. Right to work wins on principle, while union security agreements win with crony capitalism. During this debate, ask yourself whose side you're on. Do you support a worker's choice of what to do with their money and who they associate with? I trust American individuals to decide what they want to do with their lives, their work, in their workplaces with their money. Or do you support the status quo, allowing union bosses to keep filling their piggy banks with little to no accountability for their employees? Thank you, and I can see the rest of my time.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I want to talk about why we should oppose a national right-to-work law. First of all, the name right to work is very misleading. It does not guarantee anybody a job or improve job security. Instead, these laws weaken unions by allowing workers to benefit from union-negotiated wages and protections without contributing to the cost of actually maintaining that union. This creates what's called a free rider problem, where the employees would reap the benefits without supporting the actual collective effort of the union. Let's be clear here, first of all. Unions are very good for workers. In California, for example, a UC Berkeley study found that unionized workplaces in the state, on average, will pay their employees 13% more. They're 50% more likely to offer a retirement plan, and they're 37% more likely to provide health insurance for their employees than their non-union counterparts. This progress will be threatened directly by a national right-to-work law. And when a right-to-work law is actually passed in a given state, unionization rates drop almost immediately. Wisconsin, for example, implemented their own right-to-work law in 2015 and saw their union membership go from 12% to 7%. This has had major consequences as well. A study showed that within a year of adopting right-to-work, Wisconsin middle-class workers saw their hourly wages decline by 5.8% relative to their counterparts in other Midwestern states without a right-to-work law. But weaker organized labor has a lot of impacts beyond simply wages. A Harvard study found that after a right-to-work law is passed, every 1% decline in union membership attributable to a right-to-work law causes occupational fatalities to increase by about 5%. Right-to-work is not just an unfair legislation, it is also deadly. The healthcare system is affected by right-to-work as well. As mentioned before, unions significantly increase how likely employees are to actually receive healthcare from their employers, but that also has an impact on public health care as well. As a whole, the public social safety net is used about 30% less often by union members and their families. It's a little ironic that the party that opposes expanding the social safety net simultaneously opposes letting unions flourish and actually reduce dependence on the government. In general, unions are very much a force for good that improves the wages, occupational safety, and quality of life for those who work with them. Right-to-work laws actively undermine that progress by denying critical funds for unions to conduct their activities, reduces their membership rates, and as a byproduct makes employment more dangerous, less secure, and less rewarding. A national right-to-work law would simply be disastrous for the 24 states that do not already have a right-to-work law, threatening the U.S. economy as a whole.
And now for a rebuttal from GOP.
So just to be clear, you don't have to be pro or anti-union to be in favor of a right-to-work law. You just have to be in favor of individual rights. We can talk back and forth about economic statistics all day. At the end of the day, there are states with the characteristics of states and how well they do economically is not fully contingent on right-to-work laws, but states like Florida and Texas have grown precipitously since introducing right-to-work legislation. So that's kind of irrelevant. And then there's a 2019 paper from economics at MIT, Stanford, and the U.S. Census Bureau, which surveyed 35,000 U.S. manufacturing plants, so independent of state laws, and found that the business environment, as measured by right-to-work laws, boosts incentive management practices. Having the choice matters for individuals. If you introduce competition by allowing individual workers to choose whether or not they want to join the union, they will repay you. Every dollar matters for the working class, especially after prices have increased 20% over the last 4 years. If we force union accountability and that our government gives people the chance, that will allow for downscale effects, and it will also allow for the relationship between employers and their employees to not be bastardized anymore by unions. If, for example, a given working class employee wants to have a more collaborative relationship with their employers, that is completely taken out of the picture by not having a right-to-work law. That's union, as the Wall Street Journal says, that those opting out of union membership could negotiate the contract that's best for them, with taking in individual prerogatives. Union restrictions on work hours would not apply to them, allowing them to seek more flexible schedules, essential for those who care about children or elderly family members.
Okay.
And now for a rebuttal from Dems.
Okay, so I wanted to address talking about the cost of joining a union. It is true that unions do cost money in dues. However, studies show that union members earn on average 10% more than a non-union worker, and an average union's dues are about 1 to 3% of the wages. I'd like you to do the math on that. Also, on the topic of union bosses making a lot of money, corporate CEOs make hundreds to thousands of times more than the average employee does in their companies. So in a choice between, I guess, two evils, I guess, I think the unions do much better than that. Also, unions do not force anyone to donate to any of their political activities. If an employee does not choose to join a union, any dues that they pay will not only be very reduced compared to an actual member, they'll go only to collective bargaining costs. And the status quo also, I'd say the status quo right now is definitely a reduction in unions. Since 1970, union membership has decreased enormously, more than 10% in most states. Thank you.
We will now have 4 minutes of cross debate.
So I'd appreciate it if my opponent had the chance to defend the salaries or the enormous amounts of money that union bosses pull in just based off of dues. And do you believe that if workers had the choice to join a union or not, would that mean that the union bosses perhaps could take a pay cut to perhaps produce a little bit more for the people that they're technically accountable to?
What I think is far more important when considering whether or not to join a union is the benefits that the individual worker would get. As I said before, a worker is going to be paid 13% more, 50% more likely to get a retirement plan, and 37% more likely to get a health insurance plan. I think considering
well, they know these facts. They know that those facts are readily apparent to them. So if they still don't want to join the union because they feel, for example, that effectively subsidizing political contributions that they disagree with is against their values, if they don't feel like they're going to get that kind of payout based on union membership, then why force them to join, but effectively join?
As I said before, they're not subsidizing any kind of political contributions. When dues that are paid to a union by a non-union worker under federal law can only go to any collective bargaining expenses. Political expenses, lobbying are not included in the reduced amount that a non-union worker would pay in a federal law.
If I put my money into a basket of money and some of that money is used to contribute to political contributions that I don't want or I don't have any say over, that's still effectively subsidizing. You do realize that.
I would, if someone found themselves to be in that situation, I'd encourage them to go to the courts for help. What we're talking about here is whether or not there should be a national right to work law. A national right to work law would not help with just about anything in this case.
And there's a bunch of other stuff that is totally superfluous that unions spend on, which it's perfectly fine for unions to exist, and a lot of unions do great work and do great work for workers, but the fact that they give things to think tanks or to foreign causes, the Teamsters Union, for example, has extensive mafia ties, refuses to endorse Republican candidates even when they, their membership overwhelmingly supports those candidates. How is that defensible when they are forcing association of their workers and pulling in unbelievably high amounts of money based on those dues?
I think calling collective bargaining superfluous is a little ridiculous.
I never said that.
As I've mentioned, a 1% decline in union membership as a result of right-to-work laws is an increase in 5% in workplace fatalities.
You can name
They are
percentages.
protecting their workers and keeping them from dying. That is what their costs go to.
You can continue naming, you can continue with percentages and whatnot, but the fact that you just refuse to hold any accountability for union bosses who obviously participate in all sorts of malfeasance and all sorts of negative behavior is not clapping. Is a bit much. I mean, do you really think that the bosses can't forego their Yankees tickets or their athletic clubs from the dues collection just so that people can decide? If I have a sick family member and I want a more flexible work schedule, I don't want to have to go to the union to represent me. I want to be able to directly negotiate with my employer. That means that someone at any... Go ahead. Oh, well, a right to work law would effectively allow someone to do that. They can leave the union basically at any time, which they can't at the moment in 22 states.
We're going to go to a 2-minute closing statement from GOP.
This is more scripted, sorry, but how can one say that a union knows best what to do with any given employee's money? They decide on their behalf the political contributions and causes that your wage indirectly goes to. It's a tremendously condescending view to say that an employee can't self-advocate. They must give up a share of their wages because you know best. We've established that the coercion at play in non-right-to-work states amounts to nothing more than crony capitalism, the worst form. As Americans, we should opt for pro-business policies across the board, including pro-worker policies that emphasize worker choice. Workers' choice is the future. We're seeing cascading effects of AI, of the post-COVID world, where the workplace is different than it was at the turn of the century, and we're about to enter it. So I don't understand why I have to, in 22 states, 22 states, I can be effectively compulsed and lose my job if I do not join a union and I do not believe in their causes. What right-to-work statutes do is prevent workers from being fired just because they pay dues. It's an escape hatch for workers who conclude that the laws themselves are an escape hatch who conclude that the union was elected to represent their interests, either costs more than it's worth to them or advances interests they do not share. They protect freedom of choice. All they do, and I believe all of you should agree with this, is ensure that unions can do the same thing, just with slightly less money, because people will be able to choose. When people are free to choose and you trust them, you will see the benefits. Thank you.
And now for a 2-minute closing from Dems.
Overall, unions are very much a force for good that, as I've mentioned before, improves all the conditions that we were discussing. I notice a reliance on anecdotal evidence and lack of hard evidence on the Republican side, which I think shows that there's very little argument in favor of right-to-work laws. No one is forced to join a union. They are simply paying for the benefits that they are receiving, which is only fair. There's enormous tangible benefits for union membership or not union membership. And if you want to be pro-worker, being pro-union and being pro-worker are the same thing. There's no difference. When unions are weakened, workers die. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give another round of applause to Juan Pablo and River for opening this debate.
Now, for our second topic on healthcare, please welcome on your right Ben Scheinman, who will be debating for the Republicans, and on your left, Sarah Schau Steinecker, who will be debating for the Democrats. Healthcare remains one of the most hotly debated topics in American politics, particularly when it comes to the government's role in providing access. The Affordable Care Act, ACA, commonly known as Obamacare, was enacted in 2010 to expand healthcare coverage, reduce costs, and offer protections for consumers, such as coverage for pre-existing conditions. It also included provisions like Medicaid expansion and the individual mandate. Supporters of the ACA argue that it has provided millions of Americans with health insurance, improved health outcomes, and helped reduce disparities in access to care across different communities. However, critics contend that the ACA has led to higher healthcare costs for some, increased taxes, and represents an overreach of government in the healthcare sector. This debate raises a key concern about the future of healthcare in America. So, your question is, should the federal government repeal the Affordable Care Act? Democrats, we'll start with you.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for being here. My name is Sarah, and I'm really excited to be debating here for you guys. So to really understand the importance of the Affordable Care Act, let me paint you a picture of what health insurance looked like before the ACA was implemented. A lot of us are lucky enough to grow up in a reality where we know what health insurance is like with the ACA benefits. But before it was implemented, 46 million Americans did not have access to health insurance. That's 46 million people who were unable to access affordable health care and were at severe risk for financial peril if they happened to get injured or ill. According to the CDC, 16% of all Americans were uninsured before the ACA, and for Americans in our age bracket, 19 to 25, 24.1%, almost a quarter, had been uninsured for over a year. Individuals with pre-existing conditions like pregnancy, diabetes, asthma had trouble finding insurance because insurance companies had the right to jack up your premium or take away your coverage if you had one of these pre-existing conditions. Individuals with cancer were at risk for being dropped from their insurance plans. Think about that. If you had been just diagnosed with cancer, you had to worry about finding a health care plan rather than focusing on your healing. At the time, 62% of insurance plans didn't cover maternity care. That means if you gave birth, there was better than a half chance that your insurance plan didn't help pay that payment. 34% of insurance plans didn't cover substance abuse disorder treatment, 18% didn't cover mental health treatments like therapy, and 9% didn't even cover the cost of prescription drugs. So what were we paying for health insurance for in the first place? Because these things are beneficial for everybody. Now, I'm not going to stand here and say the ACA is perfect. It's not. I know it, you know it, even President Obama knows it, but it's an improvement that we drastically needed. Everyone under the age of 26 is allowed to stay on their parents' health insurance plan. People with pre-existing conditions aren't allowed to be kicked off their insurance, and insurance companies aren't allowed to jack up premiums for them. And people with cancer can focus on healing rather than finding a new healthcare insurance plan. And all those bonus extra features like coverage for giving birth and therapy and drugs, they're covered now because it's mandatory. 45 million Americans have access to health care that they wouldn't have had without the ACA. The uninsured rate has fallen to 7.7%, and the uninsured rate for children has decreased by almost half to 3.4%. Studies have shown time and time again that when people have insurance, the overall cost of healthcare decreases because they have access to preventative care. Americans are having better health outcomes, and it's because they have access to preventative care through the ACA. Infant mortality has decreased, preventative testing has increased, and chronic disease management has improved, and health inequity has begun to be addressed. Repealing the ACA would undo all of this and put tens of millions of Americans in extreme financial and health peril. Thank you.
And now we'll be moving on to GOP with their opening statement.
My name is Ben, and I'm a senior here at USC. I want to thank everyone for coming out here. I know I wouldn't want to spend my Wednesday night in any other way. You know, Sarah and I are actually friends, and even though I'm about to say that she's 100% wrong, I know that we're going to be friends after as well. When President Obama said, if you like your doctor, you could keep him, that was a lie. When Nancy Pelosi said, if you have your plan before 2010, you could keep it, that was a lie. Obamacare was supposed to give us affordable, accessible health care. However, 30 million people remain uninsured in 2024, and those that do have insurance, well, almost 16% of them are unable or afraid to go to the doctor because they think it's too expensive. However, now, healthcare is a very complicated field, and none of us are experts. However, we can enter a value debate. We can have a real discussion about what we want out of our healthcare system. My thesis is this: the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, ACA, whatever you want to call it, was first built on a lie, second, became a failure, and third, shows us that when we implement free market solutions, we could actually have healthcare that is affordable and accessible. First, the results of the ACA. As of today, 34 states have fewer insurers than before the ACA. As a result, since 2013, premiums in the individual market are up 133%. Overall, by 2022, the per capita average monthly cost of coverage had more than doubled in 40 states. For middle-income Americans, especially those overwhelmed by inflation, this is life-threatening. The Republican solution is simple: create more efficient markets for medical care through competition, transparency, and consumer incentives, rather than their destructive methods such as price controls and limit on private care choice. We advocate for something very similar to Switzerland: fully private control, requiring companies to establish basic healthcare plans, allowing for direct negotiation, and it's ranked one of the best systems in Europe. Our vision works because innovation works. For example, because of President Trump's reforms, 12 states were able to introduce reinsurance programs, which resulted in premiums being 17% lower on average in those 12 states than they would have been. They also helped 2 million more people be insured than would have otherwise been the case. The funny thing is, because of President Trump's reforms, the favorability for the ACA went up 8%. Our vision is that as the market becomes easier to enter, more companies will do so. More companies means more choices. That makes a lot of sense. When there's only one buyer in the market, in this case the government, the seller or the insurance companies will offer fewer goods. Fewer goods means prices go up for you. We saw this occur just 4 years ago. When the Biden-Harris regime passed price controls, Part D plan choices shrunk by 31%. The average natural premium increased by 46%. This affects all of us that are near or at the poverty line. Across all major healthcare measures, we are moving in the wrong direction. Premiums are up, choices are down. The system is going to collapse if we don't repeal.
Now Dems with a 2-minute rebuttal.
Thank you so much for that. So lots of things were said there. So let's unpack a few of them. First of all, no one is saying that you can't still have your private health insurance, okay? The point of the Affordable Care Act is to help those who make under 400% of the federal poverty guidelines. So if you make over that, you still have access to your employer-based health care, and also you still have access to private health care insurance. And let's talk about the free market solution. We had a free market before the ACA, and look how many millions of people were uninsured, how many millions of people were drowning in healthcare debt. The important thing to recognize about a free market economy and a free market solution and the private market is that insurance companies are going to do what's most profitable for them, which means ripping away coverage for expensive extra things like maternity care, therapy, substance abuse disorder treatments. And those who need those cares or those who have pre-existing conditions will be unable to access the market. So when you say that there's a selection, like when you say that the free market's going to increase companies that people have access to, it won't. Because say if I had asthma or another pre-existing condition, half these insurance companies won't give me an insurance plan because I will cost more for them than their average person who doesn't have asthma. So that's a false equivalent saying that everyone's going to have more access. The CDC predicts that up to 150 million people have pre-existing conditions. Those pre-existing conditions could very well bar you from getting a plan on the open market. And let's talk about this thing about increased premiums. So actually, funnily enough, it's a direct action of President Trump as to why increased premiums happened. So before October 2017, there was this thing called the cost-sharing reductions, which basically means that the federal government helped subsidize healthcare plans for those who made under 250% of the federal poverty guidelines. It's a lot of jargon, but basically it means it helps subsidize plans for lower-income Americans. When President Trump was in office, he cut that, and the American insurance companies placed the burden of subsidizing that care on other middle-class Americans instead of the federal government, raising costs of insurance premiums by 10%.
Now GOP with your 2-minute rebuttal.
I want to talk about the amount of people that have health insurance right now. Starting from the beginning, the system that we had before Obamacare was not a free market system. It was this quasi system where like the employers would negotiate for you. It was really messed up. What we're advocating for is to reform the system entirely. We have to be able to, that you yourself could go to the insurance companies and say, I need A, B, and C. What can you do for me? If the price is too high, you can go to another insurance company. Yes, the raw number of people that are insured has increased. However, since 2015, the uninsured rate in America has actually increased. Nearly 30 million people don't have insurance right now. Sarah and the ACA are not solving for this. But second, what I explained to you before is that prices are going up. Yes, more people have insurance, right? So they make like healthcare companies, you have to take these people with pre-existing problems and they decrease prices for them. But what do? They're not going to say, hey, I like losing money. I'm going to make sure that other people are going to pay more. The prices are just being redirected. And instead, there's less plans, people have less solutions, and people that need drugs are not getting them. There's a massive problem in America with drug shortages because companies know, because of price controls, they're afraid to release and put so much money into R&D and release new drugs. So instead, they just don't make as many drugs as they used to. Under the ACA, there's almost 8 million hours of care that nurses and doctors would be putting into their patients, but are instead have to use because there's a shortage of drugs. So they don't actually have the things necessary to take care of people. Yes, the ACA put a lot of people on the books, but that doesn't mean that people are actually getting the care they deserve. Remember, 15% of Americans are afraid to go to the doctor because they think it is too expensive. The ACA does not solve for them. A free market would.
And now we'll open the floor to 4 minutes of cross debate.
Amazing. So he said 15%. Before the ACA, it was 60. So let's just point that statistic out.
6-0?
Yes.
No way, 60% of people were afraid to go to the doctor.
So let's just talk about this. So let's talk about the cost of healthcare in this country.
That is not true.
No, Ben brings up a really good point. Let's talk about the healthcare cost of this country. To deliver a baby in this country without health insurance, it costs you almost $20,000. $20,000, that's right, $20,000 without any complications. If your baby has health complications, if you have health complications, if it involves an ICU, NICU.
Okay,
like,
so the
okay, can I finish?
That was a speech, right?
Wait, no.
Isn't this cross? Don't you have to
But
ask
I can
questions?
finish my point. So let's talk.
You just
no.
started speaking.
Yeah, but let me finish my
There's
point.
no
You can
question.
respond. Let me finish.
Respond to who?
You. Okay, and also let's talk about, I'll move on so he can make his point. Let's talk about drug shortages. So yes, there is a drug shortage going on, and that's a really terrible thing, and I will acknowledge that. However, let's just talk about how inaccessible drugs are to the majority of American people. A vial of insulin is so incredibly expensive that some people in this country are rationing their insulin, which is what keeps them alive. And so people die because they can't afford drugs. So it's not just about the ability to access these drugs, it's about the ability to afford them. And I think that your disregard to think about people with pre-existing conditions when considering healthcare plans is ultimately really flippant to almost half the population who has them.
It's okay. All right, so 2 things. First, on pre-existing conditions, Our claim is that people with pre-existing conditions have more leverage in our system. Medicaid has been, as Joe Biden said in the debate, got beat. Medicaid does not work anymore. People on Medicaid are not able to go to the doctors because doctors knows that there's so many regulations that they deny. There's more denies right now by doctors and hospitals than before the ACA. People have insurance, but that doesn't mean that they're getting the help that they need. Another thing about insulin, the free market would solve insulin in 5 seconds. There's generic insulin that is half the cost of the insulin that you have to get, but the government is not allowing it to get on the market. What they do in Switzerland is that they say everyone can negotiate with the companies themselves. We have a basic line of a plan that everyone has to offer, but other than that, you can go negotiate, and people can come together and innovate and come up with different solutions. Healthcare is very complicated. It's much more than just being like, oh, X amount of people don't have it, that means we suck. We actually have to go deep into it and ask what our system wants. So I want to ask you a question. What does the government do good?
Okay, so
Like an example of what the government does pretty well.
it gave millions of Americans health care. And to respond to,
But
no,
what
let me
does that-
respond to your current points, okay? Let's talk about, your plan has more leverage for people with pre-existing conditions. What plan? Because President Trump tried to repeal Obamacare so many times, guys, so many times.
Shout out John McCain.
And the only time he was able to get it to the floor to a vote was to strike it down with no alternatives. That means the Republican Party has no viable alternatives to save your health care. So you can stand here and say all you want, it's a leveraging tool. First of all, crazy way to explain a pre-existing condition. A leveraging tool to have a pre-existing condition, but in the market that existed before the ACA, that wasn't the case. And if you want to force insurance companies to give people with pre-existing conditions cheaper health care, that's the only way they're going to provide cheaper health care for people with pre-existing conditions, because people with pre-existing conditions require more health care expenses. And let's talk about insulin. Okay, so the notion that the government is holding out on cheaper insulin for people is patently false. Let's just say the drug companies would absolutely sue if we started releasing generic insulin into the market because of their patents on the drug.
Dems with a 2-minute closing statement.
Okay. Thank you guys so much for being here. I know this is super, as Ben said, super great way to spend your Wednesday night. But let me just end it with this. The Affordable Care Act is a net good for American society, American healthcare, okay? Millions of people have more insurance than they did before, and the GDP spent on health spending has actually gone down 0.4% from 2010 to 2022. So this notion that the American government is spending a ton more money and the American people are spending a ton more money on healthcare is patently false. Okay, Americans are paying more at the jump for their health care because their insurance covers more. Obamacare protects people. It protects people like you and me who are under 26 to remain on our parents' health insurance. It protects people like me who, if I want to give birth to a child one day, I know that my health insurance plan will cover it. If we need access to therapy, we know our health insurance plans will cover it. Everybody in this room has the privilege of growing up in an America where we are protected by the ACA. And imagine if you went to your healthcare insurance company and said, I need therapy, I need to go to rehab, I need to give birth to a child, or I need a prescription drug, and they said, no, it's not covered because it's too expensive for us. Health insurance is supposed to benefit you. Those are some of the most common causes for people to go to a doctor, having a child, needing a medication for an illness. These are things that every American may encounter during their life. And so for American healthcare insurances to self-opt out because it's too expensive, and the ACA forced them to opt back in because it's better for the American people. People are spending less on healthcare. And also, let's just talk about the fact that more people are uninsured than before. That's a net positive. You can stand here all you want and say that people are not able to do yes and so and so and so. Yes, the rates of Medicaid, of people being refused for Medicaid is abhorrent. And that's a separate conversation that we can discuss about why it's so bureaucratic for people to get Medicare and Medicaid benefits. But at the end of the day, more people are insured, insurance is better, people are saving money, it's a net positive, and we should not repeal it or else it will cause danger to the American people. Thank you.
Okay, now GOP with your closing statement.
I just want to start off. I didn't say pre-existing conditions are a leverage. I said that those people with pre-existing conditions need to have leverage, and that leverage is the money in their pocket. When Sarah talks about pregnancies costing $20,000, that is right now. What system do we have right now? Obamacare. That is the status quo. If you want to change it, you repeal it. I want to start off, now let's move on to Medicaid. Remember what we saw when Biden and Harris passed price controls. Part D plan choices shrunk 31%, and the national average premium increased by 46%. The people that they claim to want to help the most are the ones that are getting the hurt the most. Remember, the ACA was supposed to make healthcare affordable and accessible. 30 million people do not have health insurance. 16% of Americans with insurance are afraid of going to the doctor because they don't believe they can afford it. I want to reiterate that. The system is not helping those in need. What we need to do is ask ourselves, do we want a system that places power in the hands of government officials, the boards of three-letter government agencies, or do we want a healthcare system that is flush with options and alternatives in the hands of doctors, free of overregulation, providing for the most needy? I would argue that our vision, the Republican vision, aligns with the latter and puts the power of the decision-making back in the hands of the people. The experiment of the ACA has failed. Premiums are up 133%. Choices are down. Those on Medicaid and Medicare have had their options reduced, and people are struggling to make ends meet. At the end of the day, when you look at what you want the system to be, you have to decide what is more important, to have doctors control, to give people the option to choose different plans, or to have some government official say, these are the set of options you can pick from, you don't like it, that sucks. What Switzerland was able to do was give people leverage and let them directly negotiate. Thank you.
Let's give a round of applause for Ben and Sarah on healthcare.
All right, for our third topic on voting rights, please welcome on your right Tanner Dote, who will be debating for the Republicans. And on your left, Donovan O'Leary, who will be debating for the Democrats. The future of voting policy is one of the most critical issues shaping American democracy today. From the 2020 election onward, expanded access to mail-in ballots and early voting has drastically changed the voting landscape. This has reignited questions of not only how one should be able to vote, but whether some should be able to vote at all. One specific and often contentious issue is whether felons should be allowed to vote after they serve their sentence. In many states, individuals convicted of felonies lose their right to vote either temporarily or permanently. Supporters of restoring rights argue that once individuals have served their time and paid their debt to society, they should be fully reintegrated as citizens, which includes the right to participate in the democratic process. They see voting as a critical component of rehabilitation and a way to reduce recidivism. Conversely, opponents believe that committing a felony is a serious violation of the social contract, and certain rights, like voting, should be withheld as a consequence. The debate touches on fundamental questions about justice, fairness, citizenship, and how society should treat those who have committed crimes. So the question is, should felons be allowed to vote after serving their sentence? We'll start with the Republicans.
I'd like to thank the Political Student Assembly and all of you and my opponent for coming out here tonight. I just want to start off by establishing what a felony actually is. So felonies, some of the common examples: robbery, murder, kidnapping, child molestation. Most often, in most cases, felonies are punishable by at least a year in prison. So we're talking pretty serious offenses here. I also want to preface by saying that I totally believe in the power of change, and I don't think that because somebody commits a violent crime, or even some felonies are nonviolent as well, that means they're a bad person for the rest of their life and not deserving of voting rights. But what I do believe is that we can't just be handing out voting rights to people that aren't fully reformed to properly serve the good of their society again. Because in reality, felons break the law and infringe upon the rights of others. So why would we hesitate to take away their voting rights when they have so willingly taken away the rights of others? Why would we let felons contribute to the lawmaking process by electing candidates and voting on ballot initiatives and a referendum that could directly affect the sort of crime that they committed? a study was done that revealed that nearly 2/3 of felons, after being released, were rearrested within 5 years. More than 1/3 of all prisoners who were rearrested within 5 years of their release were arrested within the first 6 months after release, with more than half arrested by the end of the first year. So as we can see, felons coming out of prison aren't fully reformed members of society. Unfortunately, our current criminal justice system and the current prison system fails to properly rehabilitate felons, which is something that we also need to attend to. That being said, though, if we give voting rights to felons, this reinforces, if we don't give voting rights to felons as they come out of prison, it reinforces the principle that voting is a right with responsibility. The responsibility to be a law-abiding member of society, not handing out voting rights to somebody the day they come out of prison. In fact, felony disenfranchisement, which is what we're talking about here, is supported in the US Constitution. The 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868, includes the caveat that the right to vote may be abridged for participation in rebellion or other crime. So, completely constitutional here. First, I should state that I completely, and I hope that we can all agree, that felons should not have the right to vote while incarcerated, but I also hope that we can agree that once felons are out of prison, there should be requirements that they have to meet first, time requirements, before they can vote again.
Thank you. And now for the Democrats.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for being here today. The issue of felon voting rights and whether or not felons should be able to vote post-release is one of pivotal importance to America's founding tenets of representation. At the core of this issue, one must ask, is the prison system meant to rehabilitate or punish its prisoners? If the system is meant for rehabilitation, then by the time they get out, former felons should be able to reintegrate back into society without the baggage of being a former prisoner. Or, if the system is supposed to be a form of punishment, then former felons have served their time and should be allowed to become normal citizens again when they're released. Whether you believe prison serves as punishment or as rehabilitation, it is clear that the disenfranchisement of felon post-release isn't the answer. Let's be clear, this isn't a hotly contested debate nationwide. Out of 50 states, only 10 do not allow felon voting post-release. That's 1 in 5. Even Republican strongholds such as Texas and South Carolina allow felon voting post-release. On a global scale, the US is still an outlier in terms of voting rights restrictions. According to a study conducted in 2021, out of 45 countries studied in Europe, South America, and North America, only 3, besides the United States, had any kind of voting restrictions on felons post-release. So his stance is only supported by 1 in 5 in the United States, and 3 in 45 globally. If Republicans, he was talking about safety and recommitment range, if felons, Republicans, and everyone else for that matter want to reduce crime rates and reoffense rates, according to a study conducted by the University of Minnesota, people with a criminal history were significantly less likely to be rearrested if they voted in a presidential election. The path to reintegration does not go through alienation. Taking away someone's fundamental right to vote for any felon simply does not make sense. Not all felons are murderers or thieves. Permanently taking away an individual's rights to vote for having a couple grams of cannabis on them, especially after they serve their time as punishment, is absurd and makes no sense.
Thank you. Republicans, you have 2 minutes for a rebuttal.
All right. First, I just want to say that the U.S. shouldn't be obliged, nor should we feel obliged, to model our laws after other countries. I mean, after all, we've been groundbreaking in many areas of public and political life. So I think bringing up that other countries, we're not like them. We're not like them in a lot of other ways, too. So no need to really fit the status quo there. I think we should first be all able to agree that felons, while incarcerated, shouldn't have the right to vote. But meanwhile, in the District of Columbia, Maine, and Vermont, felons never lose their right to vote, even while being incarcerated. The solution that I would propose is that felons on post-release should not immediately regain their voting rights. Instead, they should be required, depending on the severity of their crime, to serve a certain period of, say, probation, if it's drugs, for instance, say a year. If it's murder, though, say 10 years, where they have to prove that they will not commit a crime during that time. And if so, after that time, they can regain their voting rights. I also would agree that, or I disagree, because I think that, that there should be some limit to what a state can do to limit felon voting rights. For instance, I do think that some states have overly cumbersome requirements that put felons in almost impossible situations to regain their voting rights at some point. I don't think that's fair. I think it needs to be clear-cut, but I do think that it should be very clear and that it should be a time limit, that the felon know exactly what they need to do to regain their voting rights. I'm for felons regaining their voting rights, but only after proving that they can now act as a functioning and moral member of society.
Democrats?
Yeah, so let's analyze a couple of statements he went over in his opening statement. First, he said that we shouldn't be handing out voting rights. I'm pretty sure that's what a right is. You hand them out, and when you're born, you have them. And they never get taken away. We were founded as a democracy. Our founding fathers believed that we should have voting rights, not voting privileges that can be taken away. Secondly, he mentioned that 2/3 of felons are rearrested. So the solution to this isn't to further alienate them and to raise that number. The solution to this is that we need to take measures to integrate felons further into society and make them feel like they're actual members of society. And they can't do that if they're not represented. Thirdly, he did bring up that it is in the Constitution. Specifically, if you guys remember, he said the 14th Amendment states that the right to vote may be a bridge for participation in rebellion or other crime. Firstly, there's a difference between may be and should. Should someone who cashed a bad check at 18 be disenfranchised for life? Should your presidential candidate, Donald Trump, be barred from voting? Our question is, should felons be able to vote post-release? And I believe that out of the 5 million citizens currently disenfranchised, only a marginal fraction have committed heinous enough crimes to remove their rights permanently. That punishment should not be applied to all.
Okay, thank you. We'll now have 4 minutes of cross-debate.
So I have a question to start out here. So you mentioned in your cross section that your solution to stop post-release voting was maybe making felons maybe 10 years or 20 years without committing a crime. So only 1 in 5 states currently support that. Would you enforce a national ban that infringes on the states' rights to decide for themselves? Because that's what it's sounding like your solution is.
No, most definitely not. I do think that it is a state's right, and that's how it stands, and that's how it's going to be. That's how it's going to stay. I do want to comment on a couple things that you said. Namely, I think we can agree that the criminal justice system and the prison system needs much reform because, again, if 2/3 of felons are being reincarcerated very soon after their release, that's a problem. But in the meantime, I don't think we can allow violent criminals the voting rights back. I would also like to argue that Democrats don't really care about felons' voting rights. That's really not what's behind it. They're interested in giving voting rights to people so that they can get votes from people. They want to give illegals the right to vote. And so, yeah, I would argue that this whole spiel to give voting rights to felon, even while in incarceration, is all a voting grab. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, so firstly, let's get it out of the way. You don't take away people's rights and give them. We're a party of caring, and we're a party of equal representation. And we're not allowing people to vote so they can vote for us. We're allowing people to vote because that's what they should be able to do. I have a question for you. Only 1/5 of states in the United States support your view. How do you represent the majority opinion of the American people?
Well, what solution do you propose then? That's my solution.
That's not really an answer and has nothing to
Okay,
do with it.
well-
I'd love if you answered my question.
My solution is that I am kind of falling in the middle here because there are some states like Florida where I do believe it is too cumbersome. There's many fines that have to be paid. There's many administrative tasks that must be completed first before a felon can regain their voting rights. That's not right. That's limiting their right to regain their voting rights. But I would argue that there has to be a boundary where the felon has, or the ex-felon in this case, has taken proper care to become a proper and moral member of society again before they can regain their voting right. This, giving them back their voting right immediately would be a disgrace to the families, the victims affected by their violence.
Yeah, not giving it back to them is a disgrace to America and the Founding Fathers. Follow-up question for you. Do you agree with the phrase, no taxation without representation? Something that America was built on. And if so, felons are taxed like every other citizen post-release. How are they not entitled to the same representation as everyone else?
Felons broke, according to social contract theory, people have a moral and political obligation to fulfill to follow the law. They have broken that law, and so therefore they forfeit certain rights, just as they do while in prison. I have a question for you. You're all for voting rights for everybody. Should non-citizens, illegals, be allowed to vote?
So, number one, referring to them as illegals is a very Republican thing to do. They're people. Number two, children know that eventually they will be able to vote. Children, there should be a voting ban. That's completely different. And one moment while I get my notes out here. Yeah, so voting isn't a privilege, it's a fundamental right, and you have to mature into that right. Like you said, there are certain responsibilities that come with it, but everybody's guaranteed it.
Thank you both. We'll now begin closing statements. Republicans, go ahead.
So in closing, I'd like to reinforce again that, yes, everybody is entitled to the right to vote so long as they follow their social contract. And in the case of felons, they have clearly violated their social contract, violating the rights of others. And so their privilege of voting rights should be taken away. I don't agree that felons, while incarcerated, should be allowed to vote. I hope that's something we can agree on. I also, though, don't agree that they should be allowed to regain their voting rights immediately after being released. I think that's ridiculous. I think we have a responsibility as a society to ensure that our voters are willing the good of our society. And in the case of felons, they have clearly shown us, at least for a period of time, because again, I totally believe in the conversion of felons into fully formed and moral citizens of society later after their incarceration. But I will say that if you're coming out of jail, prison, and you're committing these crimes right after you're being incarcerated, then why should we allow you to vote on issues that may directly affect the crimes that you are committing? Why should we let you make the law when you are just interested in breaking the law? And so that's the question I'd pose for everybody here tonight.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you, thank you. You have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
So I just want to start this by saying that, again, reinforcing the fact that this is only supported by 1 out of every 5 states in the United States. I'm on the side of majoritarian politics. I'm on the side of 4 out of every 5 states. That is 1 out of every 4. If you want to take the rights away of citizens post-release, what is the solution? A national ban, like you proposed? How could you justify overriding an individual state's rights to make its own legislation? And why would you infringe on the legislative responsibility of the states just to take the rights away of your own citizen? Here, he's been speaking a lot about giving rights, taking them away, giving rights, taking them away. That's not what a right is. A right is something that everybody should be afforded. A right is something that, regardless of where you come from or who you are in America, everybody should have. So it's proven that allowing felons to vote post-release creates a safer America, and that inhibiting this would only prove to alienate them further. Finally, I'll close off with this. Many Republicans believe that their presidential candidate, Donald Trump, was wrongfully convicted of a felony. If they believe that Trump was unfairly treated by the justice system, why would they comfortable with permanently taking the voting rights away of millions of citizens based on a system that they don't trust. Thank you, and fight on.
Thank you both. Let's give it up for Tanner and Donovan.
They're gonna come out, right? Yeah. Okay, guys, for our last and final topic of the night, we're going to be talking about the current 2024 presidential election. Please welcome on your right, Dakota Dreimeyer, who will be debating for the Republicans. And on your left, MD Zahir, who will be debating for the Democrats. We would also like to welcome to the stage President of Trojan Debate Society, Vera Junija, to join us in moderating the last segment of our debate.
For this final segment, we're trying something new, something we've never done before in the years of hosting this debate. Leading up until today, we've been collecting issues and concerns directly from you, the audience, through social media. The questions we'll be asking have been entirely shaped by your voices. And just to be clear, with the exception of Veer, no one standing on the stage has seen the questions until now, not even me and Duncan. With only 12 days until the election, tonight we're giving our debaters the opportunity to not only address your most pressing concerns, but to convince you why their candidate is the right choice. So now we shift our focus to the main candidates running for president, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. This election represents a pivotal moment for our country, and it's particularly significant for young voters like yourselves. The decision made in this election will shape the future of key issues such as the economy, healthcare, and democracy itself. As the next generation of leaders, your voice and your vote can play a crucial role in determining the direction of our nation. We'll now dive deeper into the specific policies and leadership qualities of both candidates. And now, through this next segment, we will examine their positions on various issues raised by you, the audience, to better understand how each candidate's vision aligns with the future you want to see.
The format for this final section will be slightly different from the rest of the debate. Each debater will receive 2 pointed questions about their candidate's policies chosen from audience submissions. They'll have 2 minutes to respond to each question with no rebuttals. We will alternate between debaters for a total of 4 questions. We will then ask a final, broader audience question on a key policy issue. Each debater will have 2 minutes to respond, beginning with the Democratic debater. To wrap up, each debater will have 1 minute to deliver a closing statement in support of their candidate's policies. This is your opportunity to reinforce your arguments, either by building on previous topics or presenting a final prepared response. Please remember that time limits are strictly enforced. You'll hear a gavel when you have 10 seconds remaining, and time will be called when it's up. There will be no crosstalk or interruptions during this segment, as we want to ensure each debater has a full and fair opportunity to present their case. With that being said, Veer will handle the question moderation from here.
Thank you, Duncan. The first question goes to the Democrats. After reviewing our audience sentiments, it is evident that immigration is a top concern in this election. Critics have argued that under the Biden-Harris administration, the U.S. has experienced over 8 million migrant encounters, which is more than 3.5 times higher than during the Trump administration. Additionally, the immigration court backlog has reached a record 3 million cases, causing asylum seekers to wait 4 to 5 years just for their cases to be heard. Given these statistics, your question is, what makes Harris's immigration plan a more effective solution than Trump's policies in addressing these concerns, while also ensuring border security and humane treatment?
All right. I want to start off with quoting their own Ronald Reagan, who has said that America is nothing without immigrants. Immigrants make up of the backbone of America. They're not just workers, they're entrepreneurs, scientists, teachers, and soldiers. And again, Kamala Harris believes not in an open border like they've been telling you for the past 6 months, but rather a secure and humane process. For the undocumented people that we already have here in this country, she will fasten up the immigration process by having them pay taxes and then background checks. These are law-abiding migrants that, again, contribute daily to our economy being number one, and again, our culture, our communities, right? And at the same time, she looks at the root of these issues. Why do they come to this country? Poverty and violence in Central America is a huge part why. She has secured $5.2 billion in private investments during her time in office for the past 4 years and has affected development in these regions. But rather than pointing fingers, she actually looks at the causes, reasons, and takes actions. Since we want to talk about why there are so many cases, there was a bipartisan bill that came out that on both sides of the alley included one of the most conservative members in the US Senate. And it was also endorsed by the Border Patrol, the men and women on the front lines. Guess who blocked it? Donald Trump. If he cares so much about immigration, about so many people coming into this country, why didn't he say okay to the bill, a bill that both sides agree on? Because he would rather run on a problem than to solve it. Because if he truly wanted to solve it, he would have done it earlier, and he has not. Because we can look at the Remain in Mexico policy, which stripped away children from their parents. 5,500 kids have still yet to see their parents again. We can talk about him failing to have Mexico pay for the wall, which he said he was going to do. He failed. He also failed to complete the wall. He has no plan on how he's going to do a mass deportation because it would cost over $90 billion to fund for that. And at the same time, again, removing millions of people from the workforce will, according to the Wall Street Journal, $1.6 trillion in reduction from the GDP over the next 20 years.
Thank you. And our next question is for the Republicans. According to the Pew Research Center and our own audience sentiments, the economy remains one of the most pressing concerns among both Democrats and Republicans. Trump has stated that under his plan, inflation will vanish completely, but his tariff policies have received mixed reviews, with some economists arguing that they will contribute to higher consumer prices. That being said, your question is, how can Trump convince voters that his economic strategy, particularly his focus on tariffs, will reduce the cost of living compared to Harris's approach to trade relations?
Well, thank you so much for the question. I appreciate it. And good evening, and thank you to the PSA. I want to start off by saying this is the largest Kamala Harris rally I've ever seen. Anyway, I would like to get into how awful Kamala Harris's price control policy is. She is a known Marxist that we have running for President of the United States. And anyway, she's proposed these price controls that are similar to what is going on in Venezuela. And we have seen food shortages like you wouldn't believe in Venezuela. And yet this is what she's proposing for the United States of America. You know, and the reality is so much more complicated because they talk about corporate greed when they talk about prices. And the problem is her own Department of Agriculture has said that it's not a price gouging issue. It's the fact that their trade relations are so awful that they have not actually tackled China. And they've continued to ignore the issue entirely. So what Donald Trump is proposing, and you know, he's thrown around this world a word tariff. And this is apparently a terrifying word for all of you that don't understand basic economics. Anyway, that's funny, right? Anyway, I would like to get into why this tariff policy is going to work. Because under Trump's presidency, he went to bat against China and got 50 trade deals done with them that increase grain prices for our farmers, lower food costs, and now Kamala Harris comes in and they keep the same tariff policy because they are so amazing and they have no idea how to even run a country. That's why prices are through the roof. We saw record inflation, 9.1% in 2022 and failed. And don't even get me started on the border. Immigration is through the roof. It's 600% under Kamala Harris's leadership, who was tasked to be the border czar by Joe Biden himself, and has yet to do anything. In fact, I'd like to talk about Jocelyn Ungary, and I'd like to talk about Laken Riley and Rachel Morin that Kamala Harris refuses to mention by name or even acknowledge the fact that they've been killed by illegal aliens that are flowing into this country.
Thank you. And now back to the Democrats. Harris has faced criticism for her shifting stance on fracking, once supporting a ban, but most recently voting in favor of policies that expand oil and gas drilling under the Inflation Reduction Act. This has raised questions about the consistency of her climate commitments. So your question is, how can voters trust her climate commitments? And what can they expect from her energy policy moving forward?
They can trust her views on climate because the Inflation Reduction Act invested in clean energy and infrastructure, creating over 117,000 jobs in industries like solar and EVs. And about the fracking thing, I think it's better to grow and change your mind on things. I think that's called being educated, rather than sticking to your talking points for 12 years at this point and not changing any of it. And, it's like, again, people change, people grow, and she's shown that. I would rather have politicians that can admit their mistakes and change their perspectives and educate themselves than stick to those talking points all over again just to win an election. And her plan aims to have 50%, again, in terms of EVs, 50% of all new vehicles sold electric by 2030, right? At the same time, her $2 trillion investment in the green infrastructure will create over 2 million jobs, investing in renewable energy, expanding the EV sector, building climate-resilient infrastructure, and again, a plan that focuses on solar, wind, and nuclear energy expansion that will be 100% clean by 2035. Now, let's look at Trump, right? Again, Trump's approach to climate isn't just reckless, it's dangerous. He prioritizes fossil fuels, and again, expanding oil drilling, coal mining, and fracking. He's also made it very clear that he wants to withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement, which would isolate the U.S. from global climate efforts, weakening international cooperation. At the same time, Trump rolled back during his first term over 100 environmental regulations. This increased greenhouse gas emissions, worsening air and water quality, and at the same time, his 2024 plan focuses on expanding fossil fuels to even a much greater level, which could accelerate climate change, not stop it down. He doesn't believe in science, so how can we trust him to deal with our climate crisis? And again, the climate policy isn't just about reducing emissions, it's about building a healthier and more resilient economy. Not only does Kamala create jobs, at the same time, she pushes our efforts forward.
Thank you. And now to the Republicans for the last pointed question. After reviewing audience sentiment, we saw many people note concerns over the Trump administration's high turnover rate, with key positions often left vacant or filled only temporarily. So your question is, how can Trump convince voters that this pattern won't continue into his second term? And what steps will he take to ensure that his second administration runs both smoothly and efficiently?
Thank you for the question, but actually I want to talk about Kamala Harris because, she actually has one of the highest turnover rates of any vice president in American history.
Answer the question.
You're interrupting my time. Thank you. So anyway, thank you. I'm talking. Anyway, Donald Trump built one of the greatest economies in the United States history. He created 6.6 million jobs. He had inflation at a record low, basically no inflation, zero illegal immigration, but yet everything we hear from Kamala Harris is the opposite. She would rather these people flow across the border and our children be killed by fentanyl than actually do anything about it. In fact, the leading cause for death for everyone in this room is actually fentanyl. 17,000 pounds of fentanyl have flown across the border, in fact, and have killed many. 17,000 pounds is enough to kill every person in the United States 14 times, and yet she's done nothing. And you've talked about the bipartisan border bill earlier, and I want to talk about how this bill actually was struck down by 6 Democrats. 6 Democrats actually voted against that bill, which ultimately led to be killed because the Senate majority is actually so narrow. So thank you for lying to everyone in this room this evening. So obviously, this also continued to fund sanctuary cities when they have, and actually, I also want to talk about crime too. Let's talk about Springfield, Ohio. That's controversial, right? But actually, I want to talk about Brian Heck, who actually sent a letter to the Senate begging for relief from this illegal immigration crisis going on in Springfield. Apartment complexes are being overrun by migrants. I don't think anyone in America should live like that. So regardless, you know what? Regardless of how many people turned over because they can't handle the heat from Donald Trump, he delivered results. Kamala Harris has delivered nothing, nothing, nothing. She has destroyed this country, and when she will continue to do it even worse when she is not president of the United States, and when people elect Donald Trump, the 47th president of the United States.
Thank you. Now, going on to our final broader question of the night, we're going to start with a Democratic response. The question is, young voters today are facing a range of critical issues, from climate change and economic uncertainty to healthcare and civil rights. We know that with such a clear divide between the candidates in this election, the outcome will have a significant impact on the trajectory of the future we face as young people, especially as many of us prepare to leave college and enter the workforce. Given that, the question for both of you is, with so much at stake in this election, if you had 2 minutes to make your case, why should young people believe that your candidate will create the best future for them? And what policies or vision does your candidate offer that speaks directly to their hopes and concerns?
One word, Project 2025 won't happen if Kamala Harris is elected president of the United States.
Death to bureaucracy.
At the same time, she has a future for us because she does not have concepts of a plan. She has a plan. That plan is making the rich pay. She will raise corporate taxes to 28%, targeting large corporations to make sure that they help us pay for healthcare, education, and infrastructure, right? This will raise over $1 trillion in 10 years, according to the Wall Street Journal. At the same time, ban price gouging, because again, she will introduce aggressive legislations that will prevent price manipulations in food and essentials that we need as Americans every single day. She will increase the child tax credit to $6,000, cutting child poverty in half, providing direct relief to low-income families. At the same time, a $200 billion investment building over 1.5 million affordable housing units, cutting down in places like LA where it's so high demand, down 10%, and a $25,000 tax cut for first-time home buyers, because again, we want to live in a country where we can afford a home, have health care, and provide that future for our children as well, right? And again, I've heard a lot of talk about the greatest economy of all time from this side. That economy was Barack Obama's, okay? Trump inherited an economy with an unemployment rate of 4.7% and a job growth of $200,000 a month and a recovering GDP. His mismanagement of COVID-19 led to 22 million jobs lost. He tanked that economy. He tanked that economy to 14.7%, the lowest since the Great Depression, okay? At the same time, his gray tariffs, the heart of his plan, right? Again, resulted over $90 billion in losses during his first term. At the same time, his failed tax cuts for the rich added $2 trillion to the deficit. 84% of those benefits went to the top 1%. At the same time, you can also explain to them why under Trump, the richest 1% captured the most economic gains during COVID, which resulted over $800 billion, while 40% of Americans, according to Pew Research Center, could not afford a $400 emergency.
GOP, answer the same question, please.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So I want to talk about something that's going to actually affect everyone in this room this evening is housing and housing cost. Because Kamala Harris says she has a plan to somehow fix the housing crisis. She's proposed over $100 billion in down payment assistance for first-generation home buyers, 25,000. And she's going to supposedly subsidize 3 million new housing units. But what I want to talk about is the fact that these subsidies have failed twice, and they led to a housing crisis that Barack Obama oversaw. In fact, and the problem is 3 million of the recipients of this could actually already afford these homes to begin with. But what also is going to be the problem is it's going to introduce 1 million new buyers into the market, effectively outpricing everyone in this room, which is exactly what's happening in LA. It's exactly what's happening in Nashville, Tennessee. It's exactly what's happening in all these major cities that people are being outbid in their own communities, and that's a problem. And this is unlikely to increase housing supply because she's simply just extending low-income housing tax credits that already exist in the books. This is not a novel idea. And she's going to supposedly subsidize these programs. But you mentioned Project 2025, and I am 100% for it, every last bit of it. Because you know what? Death to bureaucracy. The bureaucracy costs too much, it's way too complex, corruption is through the roof, and it is killing innovation in this country. Yeah, that's wild. So, you know what? I'm tired of all this fear-mongering when it comes to it.
Corruption? Really?
Yeah, corruption. There's
5,000
Please do not interrupt the speaker.
unelected. There's 5,000 unelected bureaucrats in the bureaucracy that all are somehow left-leaning and kill every major policy that's going to come through Congress and actually make a difference. Because Kamala Harris's donors don't actually want to change anything. They aren't going to reform the tax code. They're simply going to leave the country so they can avoid those taxes to begin with. So you can raise the taxes on the rich all you want. But if you don't actually fix the system for the actual Democratic donors that are supporting her, you aren't going to have any change at all.
All right. Thank you to you both. Lastly, our closing statements, starting with the Democrats.
Sorry, don't count my time yet. It's on my phone. All right. If history has taught us anything, it is this. When men rise to power by spreading fear, scapegoating vulnerable groups, and using lies as weapons, they lead us down a path of division and darkness. We have seen this before in history's darkest hours, and we know where it ends. We cannot entrust the future of our democracy to someone who defies the very law he's supposed to protect. Someone who is convicted of 34 felonies by a jury of fellow Americans and who seeks to divide and not unite. Kamala Harris offers us a different vision, a vision of hope, compassion, and progress. We will build a nation where healthcare is a right, where immigrants are treated with dignity, where the climate crisis is met with bold action, and where every American, no matter their race, gender, or background, has a fair shot at prosperity. This is a moment for hope, not fear, for unity, not division. We will not turn back to the dark past that Trump envisions for us, and we will not be marked by division, hate, and chaos. And I hope I can sway all of the undecided voters that we have amongst the crowds today, because again, we will forge a brighter future. So please vote blue.
Well, I've had a great time throwing insults at each other. It was a great time. Anyway, what I do want to talk about, ladies and gentlemen, at the heart of this election is actually the stories of everyday Americans. I promise I'll actually take this serious, because I know no one would take me serious in this room. People like the farmers and ranchers in Iowa, the small business owners in Michigan, law enforcement officers in Georgia, to the truck drivers and coal miners in Pennsylvania. These are all anything but ordinary people who have built this nation with their bare hands. Or parents in Arizona that are struggling to put food on the table or forge a better life for their children. The veterans in Wisconsin who risk their lives to protect the American way of life, and the young dreamers in big cities and rural towns alike. Yet the Democrat Party and Kamala Harris's rhetoric often seems to disregard these people entirely. You talked about banning fracking. Go tell that to the people in Pennsylvania. You talked about cracking down on coal mining. Go tell that to the coal miners in West Virginia. Anyway, the Democratic Party hates America, and I hope everyone in this room wakes up. Because you may be woke, but you aren't awake.
All right, thank you. Let's give it up for both Dakota and MD on the candidates.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. We have finally concluded our fall 2024 debate, and I think our debaters deserve another round of applause for their thoughtful participation and commitment. On behalf of the USC Political Student Assembly, I'd like to also extend a thank you to our co-hosts, the USC Political Union, the USC Center for Political Future, Trojan Debate Society, Trojan Democrats, USC College Republicans, and of course, our amazing PSA team. Your support and collaboration have made tonight possible. And finally, to our audience, thank you for coming and for contributing to an atmosphere of respect, tolerance, and open dialogue. Your engagement is what makes events like these meaningful.
Thank you, Haley, and thank you to PSA for allowing the political union to be a part of this incredible event. To our audience, your job is not over yet, so please don't leave. The election is less than 2 weeks away. We encourage you to vote and to stay engaged after the election. USC's voter engagement organization, VoteSC, has compiled resources to help you navigate your voting process at votesc.turbovote.org. Thank you again for coming and for supporting this exercise in healthy political discourse. Keep up with the political union, PSA, and our partner orgs on socials so you never miss a political event at USC. Finally, we have food left, so please take some on your way out. We look forward to seeing you all in the spring for our next debate. We promise you won't want to miss it. Until then, fight on.